So, what are we going to discuss here? Our second session is about decarbonization pathways. But it's very difficult to trace a pathway if you don't know where you are. So our session is very much about the databases, the knowledge bases, and the modeling that allows us to determine what is the pathway that is needed to transform the transport systems in low and middle income countries. I'm not going to make any further introduction because you are the ones who are really going to share with us some activities, some initiatives funded by the FCDO, funded as well by, of course, climate compatible growth, that are helping us to get there. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion as well so we can know what Asian Development Bank, UNESCAP, and many others are doing. We will have a video address because we are missing here one of the speakers. So let me start by introducing my fellow panelists here, and that way you know a bit what perspectives they are bringing and who is who here with us today. In case you didn't, you probably know who they are, but let me do the formalities as well, bearing in mind our online audience. So with us we got Mark Howells, who is the director of the Climate Compatible Growth. He's jointly appointed at Loughborough University and the Imperial College. With us we got as well Liza Castillo, who is senior director for knowledge management and former deputy minister for transport in Costa Rica. I have with me as well Wei Shiuen Ng, who is the chief of section leading currently on the development of low carbon and inclusive transport in the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. We have as well with us Nicolas Peltier, who is Global Director for the Transport Global Department in the Infrastructure Vice Presidency of the World Bank. And last but not least, we will have a video address from Malindi Msoni, who is leading the Transport and Infrastructure Development Unit in the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. Malindi tried to be with us. Visa issues prevented her from being here today, but she has kindly sent a video address. So we're going to start with a couple of presentations, isn't it? So we get to get a bit of a deeper dive on some of these tools that are already out there on this question of databases, knowledge bases and modelization. And then we're going to have a bit of a chat all together, perhaps with a bit more of a focus, of course, on the colleagues who have not talked so far. Holger, I need to ask you what if we have a moment for the video address in particular, or if you
at the end of the
at the end of the presentations, I think. So it will be, I think, that's the way we're going to do it. So Mark, we're going to hear from you first, if that's okay with you, about data to deal. It's already quite a catchy name there. Then we're going to hear from Liza about the Transport Decarbonization Initiative, and then we're going to go to Malindi to hear her video address. So Mark, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so very much, and it's an absolute privilege here to be here. My name is Mark Howells. I direct the Climate Compatible Growth Program, which is a UK FCDO funded program with a set of its leading universities. So we mentioned Loughborough, but Imperial College, UCL, Oxford, Cambridge, the Open University, and we work with KTH in Sweden as well. I would also like to thank all of the partners who are part of this really important community. I think it is the case that we're on the verge of being able to do something really quite special, both with respect to making sure the transport is sensibly reflected in NDCs and climate change scenarios, but also that that's translated into the mobilization of finance. Finally, it's a privilege, Honourable Minister, to have your attention and your input into this effort. So I want to start off by talking about data to deal. We've heard a lot of frustration being articulated about how to bridge these gaps, how to translate really good policy suggestions into actual finance mobilized. It's the case that at the moment, if we have a look at the climate finance that's being released, we're in the hundreds of billions rather, and we need to get to trillions. The requirement is high. So one of the things that we've been working on with a number of partners is a process to help unpack this and make it faster and simpler and understand how different pieces of the puzzle can come together. I'm going to talk generally, and then a little bit later on we'll chat about data to deal and transport in particular by the head of our international partnerships section. But data to deal refers to the sort of process of going from the data that we need to understand and translate our visions of the future into quantified cost-benefit analysis to go and mobilize that financing. There are a number of steps we've identified as being really important. I want to walk through a few of those in a minute, from securing high-level support, institutional capacity building, developing a vision that can be brought into across government, a set of important modeling that helps us think about the future that we want in quantified terms, developing a policy and regulatory framework that will allow us to realize that, and then translating that into a finance plan. And all along the way, making sure that there's targeted and sensible inclusion of stakeholders in this space. So I'm going to walk through a few of the key pieces there. The first is around securing high-level support. It is incredibly important to make sure that we can get some sort of policy alignment as we're doing our analysis. We've heard about transport, for example, not necessarily increasing demands or changing demands in transport, not necessarily being translated into energy demand requirements, for which the energy sector has to plan for, that might not necessarily get translated into environmental changes, emissions futures, and so on. And then that in turn might not necessarily get translated into the cost-benefit analysis that the finance ministry needs to work with in order to start releasing some of that finance. The finance ministry holds the bilateral engagement with the IFIs. So if the transport work doesn't find its way into the finance ministry in a structured and coherent way, it's simply not going to be possible to turn this around. So aligning policy priorities, making sure that there's a mandate to develop coherence across different areas of planning. Really quite important is developing cross-sector workflows. Every government has some sort of interministerial coordination panel. Unfortunately, that's often at a relatively sort of high level that's fairly divorced from the nuts and bolts that have to be pulled together in order to create the kind of quantified vision that we need. Another point that is critical is that this has to be driven by people in country. This is something that can't be done by consultants jetting in from the outside, doing some interesting work, because that'll just get stuck on a report. A few months down the line, that report is going to get old, the price of oil is going to get changed, all of the assumptions and conclusions in there are just going to be wrong. So it's critically important that we build capacity in country so countries can drive this process. That capacity has to be sustainable. It's the case that, and many times there are brilliant capacity building efforts inside of governments, but a year or two down the line, the skilled people that have been trained up move on. They get promoted or move sideways or move to different places. We mentioned that it's really important that it's in country. We tend to like the combination of technocrats plus academics in country, because that allows you to build the next generation of technocrats. And if we do it right, they'll be leaving university with the skills that are needed to execute data-to-deal workflows well. The last bit, which should go without saying, is that we need the right kind of technical proficiency. One thing that we found to be really tricky is that different ministries speak different languages. And while we might have exactly the same intention, an enormous amount gets lost in translation. So being able to quantify things sensibly and translate from ministry to ministry is one of the things that the groups in country that work on this need to be able to do. Next, we start off with a vision. The vision has to be aligned. We have to do work to try and understand what the overarching development goals and vision are in country. Transport might have a set of really important objectives to do with accessibility, ensuring that you could get goods to market quickly and affordably, ensuring a number of other things. The energy ministry will be worried about different things as well. Energy security, for example, making sure the lights are on, making sure you can get the lowest cost energy to your infrastructure so that you can develop faster. And the same goes for water, and the same goes for climate, and so on. Really important to have a discussion where all of these things can be brought together, and a kind of vision of the future that the country wants across ministries is articulated. That vision has to be built on the back of stakeholder engagement. It's really important that we're engaging the right stakeholders at the right time to be able to extract this information. So the stakeholder engagement process is important. In some of our work, we break it down a little bit more. So stakeholder engagement has to happen at every part of the process. And there are specific things that need to be brought out for each of those parts. But I'd like to just bring out three important and general things. Number one is just to engage early. There's nothing worse than seeing a really neat plan being developed, and then it goes out for public consultation after it's quite baked, and then it gets rejected because it didn't involve the views of important and powerful ministries. This communicating effectively, I mentioned earlier on, we speak different languages. The sooner we can realize that and translate that into what is needed is important. And one of the key actors in all of this is the Ministry of Finance. So really important to involve with the sort of high-level political mandate that I spoke about earlier on, to involve the Ministry of Finance early. The Ministry of Finance is going to be worried about things that the Ministry of Transport is often not worried about. Energy, it's not worried about. Climate, it's not worried about, and so on. But it holds the keys to the release of finance, whether domestic finance or external capital. So for example, if we're having a look at increasing road transport and so on, what does that mean for the amount of oil that's going to be imported into the country? That's going to affect the country's balance of payments. If you're going to be moving to electrified vehicles, what is that necessarily going to mean to the tax base if you've been generating a large amount of your tax revenue from the taxation of fossil fuels and so on? So engaging the Ministry of Finance early is important, and this can be done because there's a significant carrot at the end of this. And that value proposition has to be made really clear. We make that value proposition clear by translating this vision into numbers. How much is this going to cost? What needs to be invested in when, where? How much of it needs to be invested in? Does this fit into the financial flows of the country? Can we afford this? And if we can't afford it, what are the bits that we can't afford that we need to go to concessionary finance to try and understand whether or not we can afford it? Some important things that we've discovered along the way with our partners is that transparency is really important here. We found quite often getting technocrats to work with each other, that there's a sort of standard pattern. The first is that there's a bit of annoyance. It's sort of like, I'm a transport planner, why do I have to work with these energy people or the climate people? They have different worlds and so on. But it's the case that the engagement, as it starts to work, in more cases than not, we've found folk being on the same page. All of these technocrats want the same kind of development future, meet the same aspirations and to go forward. So what we try and do is recommend that folk use open source planning tools, which allows people to be able to move between the different silos. So we might make a tool that looks at transport, but it's set up in such a way that the energy people can look at that and make sense of it. Likewise, energy for transport, likewise finance for the others, and the same for climate. So we need to get this quantified vision of the future, and strongly recommend doing this with open source tools so that you can have these conversations faster and more efficiently. Once we figured out what the future is that we want, and we've broken that down into a set of projects, policies, and programs that we can understand and define, it's going to be important for us to think about what kind of policy environment that lives in. What policy and regulatory requirements are required in order for those power plants to operate efficiently and sell their electricity to the new electric vehicle fleet and so on. So it's the case that there are various things that have to be done there, and we try and step back and unpack based on that, what are the regulatory changes that need to be made. Often it's the case people talk about regulatory change or policy coherence as some big sort of panacea. What we're really interested in is the specific policies, projects, and programs that we need to support, and we can back out what's needed from that. Once we figured out what specific changes we need, we can then go and have a look at the concessionary finance that's available, local finance, how we could crowd in finance from markets and so on. But it's to a very specific, plan with these measures that have been identified. So just to start wrapping up, really important that we start to work on these credible investment pipelines that cut across ministries, and we've got ways of doing that. Data to deal is one. A consensus base is important to move forward. High-level leadership from government is important too. We need the mandate to be able to move between ministries to undertake this work. And capacity has to be built in country because it has to be led by country. Data to Deal is having a growing and exciting track record. It's been applied in different places. Costa Rica, focusing on energy with some transport, for example, was the leading case study that started this off. And we've been working with colleagues from Costa Rica in different settings in Latin America with large quantities, billions of dollars of finance mobilized. And a lot of that finance is to develop the regulatory change that's going to crowd in other investment. And there are a number of other things that, other country case studies that are being worked on. If you go onto our website, climatecompatiblegrowth.com, you get access to a ton of different resources. The QR codes are up there if you want. Data to Deal is not a CCG thing. It is. We are very, very proud to partner in this. And we've been working with a large number of organizations and institutions to try and get this right. Because I think the minister said that it's the case that we have a lot of the solutions now. The challenge is to pull this together into something structural that's functional. So I'll end off there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very much appreciated. So behind the catchy title of Data to Deal, what we have is really almost like the ideal governance process, isn't it? To get it where we need to get. But what we also need to know is where we get started. We need a diagnosis, isn't it? A diagnostic of where is the transport system. And that is a bit what the Transport Decarbonisation Index is all about, that Liza is going to introduce to us. And then after Liza, we're going to listen to the video addressed by Malindi, and then we're going to continue, of course, with your presentations in Wei Shiuen Ng. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maruxa. Thank you. Good afternoon to all. I'm going to be just an amplifier of this amazing team that is working in the Transport Decarbonisation Index. The project is implemented by SLOCAT, the Urban Electromobility Initiative, and some beautiful and wonderful experts that work with us. I must say very quickly that, as we were saying, action is an urgent, it's needed. Low and middle income countries have overtaken high income countries as the primary source of national transport. Driven largely by surface transport modes.
Lisa, you want to sit here and I can pass on the slides? That's fine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I think this one looks better. Yeah, better?
Yes.
So it's imperative.
I'll move this slide. It's myself. So is it the interface between your... I think it's better now, but yeah.
So it's imperative to align low middle income countries.
It's the big one. Maybe like that one is switch that you have. No, but you have a.
Yeah, there's a Bluetooth one for the streaming. That's what is in the plan.
Okay. Okay, one more time.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see where it's going. So, in summary, many low and middle income countries lack the capacity, data, and policy framework necessary to implement sustainable transport solutions and attract international climate finance. So, without reliable data, designing and implementing effective policies and projects become even more challenging. By providing a diagnostic toolkit, the TDI aims to support policymakers in the effort to reduce emissions from surface transport while advancing broader sustainable development objectives. Please, the next slide. The TDI seeks to address data gaps by assessing transport performance, providing insights, and connecting this policy to recommendations. The provision of a detailed overview of transport systems' specific gaps allow countries to prioritize high impact mitigation and adaptation policies while supporting them in the preparation of targeting funding proposals. Next slide, please. So countries can leverage the TDI by building partnership with financial and development institutions, mobilize financial and technical resources, improve public awareness and engagement, and of course, devise impactful policies for sustainable transport systems. Next slide, please. So the TDI features many knowledge tools The index, for example, can serve as a starting point and a premise for dialogue among policymakers, industries, and academics, and civil society, fostering a more collaborating approach to developing evidence-based, time-sensitive, and target policies to advance the decarbonization and sustainability surface transport. The TDI also follows a comprehensive framework for assessing transport in low-middle-income countries, and it combines quantitative and qualitative aspects into relevant indicators to capture the complexity of transport systems, focusing on both current performance and future commitments. Next, please. The TDI also encompasses indicators across 8 different dimensions, including passengers, including light-duty vehicles, freight systems and vehicles, emissions, finance and governance, energy, and context. So, for example, the application and the benchmarking of the TDI has been carried out across 12 pilot countries, include Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, Zimbabwe in Africa, and Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka in South Asia. So we found, next one please, some general trends. I would love to, not this one, thank you. No, the next one. Yeah, some general trends across those 12 pilot low middle income countries. So I wanted to just, they are in the screen so you can read it. I'm going to highlight, for example, the low baseline transport CO2 emissions and extremely low levels of private vehicle ownership, except in South Africa, reflecting room for further development opportunities. And some good practices, for example, in Kenya, Nepal, and Nigeria, so renewables account over 70% of the total energy emissions, pointed to important opportunities to amplify the emission benefits of transport electrification. So the piloting process across these 12 countries has demonstrated also the importance of tailored transport assessment, revealing both potential and challenges in aligning national transport strategies with global decarbonization and sustainability agendas. To be impactful, policies require, of course, an enabling, we were talking about, and financial environment and political environment. In view with this, the TDI is not used in isolation, but is to be considered in a combination with a range of policy and financing instruments to steer the sector on low carbon pathways. So other thing, for example, the missing data is crucial to develop a reliable TDI. So data gaps should be seen as a call to action to improve the data collection and sharing. Addressing these gaps, for example, will enhance the robustness and reliability of future assessments, ensuring that the TDI reflects a more comprehensive picture of transport organization efforts, and future iterations of the TDI also could aim to enhance the assessment with more indicators and expand the features of the TDI. With more data available, the TDI could, for example, be enlarged to include more indicators to reflect equity and informal transport, among other sectors. With more resources and new tools and approaches such as Python or Power BI or other coding languages, for example, we could develop and improve even further this tool. So, next please. So the TDI can empower policymakers to address knowledge and capacity gaps, to build investor trust that is so important, as you were saying, the transparency in these processes, strengthen the partnership and financial and development institutions, mobilize financial and technical support, create impactful policies for sustainable low-carbon transport, and very important thing, fast-track progress towards net zero emissions by 2050 by benchmarking against global pathways aligned to sustainable and decarbonization goals. So just to finish, the methodology developed through this project provides a foundation for future assessments, enable countries to refine them, and to refine their strategies and take decision and step towards sustainable low-carbon systems. So thank you very much for the attention. Sorry for the sound problems, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Liza. I'm going to rush us a bit because I'm really trying to catch up on time, but hopefully there'll be, an opportunity for a discussion afterwards. That's also what I'm trying to do. If you could please put the video, play the video from Malindi, that would be terrific, because we are moving now, of course, to the African perspective.
Good afternoon, and thank you, CCG, for this opportunity to make this presentation at your side event on Transport Day at this year's COP. My name is Malindi Msoni. I'm a research fellow and the current lead of the Transport and Infrastructure Development Unit at the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, a think tank based here in Zambia. So I'll be speaking to you today on the key findings coming out of a policy brief that was co-developed amongst researchers and practitioners, both based in the UK and on the African continent, representing insights from Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, Zambia, Malawi, and South Africa. Our policy brief titled Transport Energy Modeling in Sub-Saharan Africa, Innovations and Opportunities to Support Informed Policy Making Towards Equitable Clean Access for All, really set out to develop a framework for developing models that are context specific to Sub-Saharan Africa. So now you all agree with me the critical role that transport energy models and other analytical tools play in accelerating efforts to transition transportation to ensure that it's clean and equitable and encourages access to goods and services. However, due to the unique challenges that we see in many sub-Saharan African countries, such as, for example, the reliance on second-hand motor vehicle imports and also the dominance of informal public transportation, but also the chronic data challenges that many sub-Saharan African countries face, most models that usually are developed within global north context often tend to offer poor approximations of what's happening in Africa. And what happens is that because of that, policymakers tend to not relate to the results coming out of such models. And it's from this perspective that we thought it was important that we start to set out a framework or a plan for how we can build transport energy models that are more relatable for our decision makers here on the continent. And to do this, we really emphasize the issue of stakeholder involvement from the very beginning, just to ensure that there's massive uptake of the results coming out of these models, and just to reject the idea that there is a one-size-fits-all approach when clearly what's happening on the African continent is different from other regions of the world. And to do this, we started out by first compiling a list of the challenges that we see that are shared amongst African countries, and we grouped this according to infrastructure, social justice, services, and governance. And of course, I'll not go through each and every one, but just to highlight that under infrastructure, what we see in many African countries is that there's inadequate and poorly maintained public transport, and also there's inadequate infrastructure for non-motorized transportation. Under social justice, and related to some of the challenges we see in infrastructure, is that there's generally just issues around road safety with many commuters, people that walk and cycle, being the major victims of road traffic crashes, for example. And then there are also concerns around air quality due to our reliance on second-hand motor vehicle imports. Under services, our center here on public transportation, which is generally very fragmented and heterogeneous, and we see that this is the case in many African countries, and it's very difficult to coordinate and actually come up with uniform standards for improving service provision. Under governance, we've seen little pockets of efforts by African countries to develop policies around non-motorized transport, around electric mobility, but we've noted with concern that implementation has been very slow. And we also have very generally weak legal enforcement mechanisms which do not help our efforts to transform transportation systems. And we also see a very fragmented institutional framework which really makes coordination difficult and hampers efforts to improve transportation systems in general. So, in thinking about how do we promote the development of transport energy models that are context specific, that are fit for Africa, we asked ourselves two very important questions. The first is, what would be the worst outcomes if we continue with the status quo, if we continue to use models that are not built within the context of Sub-Saharan Africa? And we build these arguments around three key aspects: contextual, technical modeling, as well as equity and inclusion. And here we argue that, if we continue to use these types of models, we'll have results that are not very useful to decision makers, results that do not offer solutions to local problems and challenges, and results that rely on proxy data, because we know that we have data challenges on the continent, and because of that, a lot of these models that are developed elsewhere in the world tend to use proxies, which unfortunately do not really reflect what is happening in the continent. And we also see results that perpetuate this marginalization of certain vulnerable groups like women, children, disabled, and the elderly, and models that perpetuate an emphasis on motorized transportation as opposed to non-motorized transport. And what we see is a lot of transport investment actually going towards things like highway expansion, for example, without really thinking about other categories of transport user. So then what can we do differently, to promote models that really do explain or at least reflect the situation here in Africa? And we center our arguments around three key aspects. Again, here looking at innovations in the approaches that we use, innovations in data, as well as innovations in the applications themselves. And without having to go through each and every aspect, I'll just highlight a few here. There's an emphasis on approaches by capacitating, partners and research institutions, as well as academic institutions that are based on the African continent, to co-develop these modeling frameworks, just to ensure that there's full ownership of the models. And then we also want to emphasize the use of social technical frameworks, because transportation outcomes are the result of interactions between society and technology. And specifically in the African context, thinking about how do cultural societal norms or cultural norms, societal behaviors interact with the existing technologies and infrastructure to result in the situation that we see on the continent. And we just also emphasize the aspect of an interdisciplinary co-creation to reduce on analytical disconnects, where we are seeing an overemphasis on energy implications of transportation without looking at wider developmental issues such as equity and fairness and access and other such issues. We also want to emphasize that there's a need to communicate effectively the results of these models, and thinking creatively around how we can develop knowledge products that can be can compel policymakers to better use some of the results coming out of these models. And also on data, emphasis there on thinking innovatively, because what we've observed in many African countries is that governments tend to not invest a lot in data collection and research, and it's not by wanting, but because there are a number of competing development priorities where limited resources are required. Therefore, an emphasis on how can we use more cost-effective methods to collect data, relying, for example, on SMS-based surveying and open source data sets such as OpenStreetMaps. And yeah, so basically this is what we use to base our framework, which is shown in this slide here, which includes, the key objectives, the different levers that we can use, and the methods, as well as outputs that would be useful for developing transport energy systems models that are fit for Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to go through all the key aspects of this framework, and but then just to emphasize to everyone listening that please download the policy brief by scanning this QR code, and then you can better interact with some of the key arguments that we present in the brief, as well as the the framework that we propose, but also just to emphasize some of the key recommendations is that institutions in sub-Saharan Africa must be properly funded to ensure meaningful co-development, and also that there need to be innovations in data collection and model formulations with the aim of overcoming common data constraints in sub-Saharan Africa. I think I already emphasized this previously. And also, more importantly, that models and scenarios must be co-produced with local stakeholders and really emphasizing those other broader aspects of sustainable transport around issues of gender, equality, and social inclusion. This is just to recognize all the partners that were responsible for the development of this policy brief, and just to also highlight the researchers that were responsible for developing this policy brief. I'm sorry that there wasn't enough time to go into some of the details, but please do read through the policy brief, and we'll be happy to interact with you. You can reach out to any of the researchers that were responsible for putting together this brief. I wish you fruitful discussions and looking forward to engaging on social media. Bye for now.
Such a pity that we don't have Malindi with us, isn't it? But a remarkable, I think, picture of what are the challenges out there and also the ways to overcome them. I think that some of the most compelling messages we heard from Malindi is the prevailing data gaps, the difficulties around using proxy data that are not really going to take us where we need, and that call she made to relatable modeling exercises, isn't it? I think that a lot of the gaps that she covered in her presentation, and all of the needs for innovation and the needs for cost-effective approaches to it, resonate quite a lot with the work that I know happens in other regions. And we have Wei Shiuen Ng here with us today to bring us back to the NDC's framework somehow, and share with us what have been the findings and what are the recommendations that some partners, spearheaded by the UNESCAP, have been putting together to support countries in the Asian Pacific region towards the next round of NDCs. So, Wei Shiuen, I don't know if you want to go there, stay here, whatever is more comfortable for you. We know that there are problems. No, so I think probably you want to stay here. Yeah? Shall I give you this one?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maruxa, and thank you so much to the organizers and Holger for inviting SCAP to be part of this discussion and to bring in perspectives from Asia and the Pacific. So I know that it's late in the day and we're running behind schedule, so I'll try and be brief. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with SCAP, we're one of the 5 regional commissions of the United Nations, working with 53 member states and 9 associate members across Asia and the Pacific, all the way from Turkey, east of Turkey, to Fiji. So we do cover a broad range of countries with diverse needs and many different types of NDCs that we've been reviewing, and some that are more ambitious than others. And I shall go through some of our key findings and our current discussions with our member states in my intervention. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, so a lot of the figures that you'll be seeing in my intervention will come from 2 main policy briefs. The one that we're very happy to co-develop with SLOCAT and other partners with ADB and the Asian Transport Outlook, as well as another policy brief led by ASCAP and UNEP that was launched last Friday in Baku at COP. So the first slide here actually shows where we are in Asia Pacific. In terms of CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, this is a region that is contributing 60% of global emissions in 2023. And a lot of these comes from transport, and also we do know that this is also a region that accounts for more than 60% of global fossil fuel CO2 emissions, and more than 50% of global energy-related CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. And so if we break it down into different sectors, we'll see that about 73% of these emissions for the transport sector actually only comes from a handful of countries. And I think this is not surprising. So it's China, India, the Russian Federation, Japan, Indonesia, and the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. And going into the different breakdowns, again, across some of the different countries and looking at the share of sectoral emissions, we can once again see that transport is in fact the second largest emitting sectors in most of the countries in Asia Pacific. So beyond the few countries that I've just mentioned, but also within other countries, smaller countries that are not contributing in terms of absolute amounts of CO2 emissions, transport still plays a very critical role. So being second place in some of these countries here that are shown on this slide. Next slide, please. And at the same time, we know that, and we've also heard from many speakers earlier today, that we still don't see ambitious transport targets in existing NDCs, and we do hope that this will change with the next cycle. And right now, there are only about 33% of the NDCs that have been submitted that actually have very quantitative transport CO2 emission reduction targets. So this is a very small percentage compared to almost 100% of NDCs that have indicated transport in some shape and form. And so what does this mean for Asia Pacific? So out of our member states, we've actually realized that only 8 countries out of the 53 SCAP member states have concrete targets. So concrete CO2 emission reduction targets for the transport sector. And in fact, most of the NDCs that we've seen for the region are only focusing on a few measures. So they're mostly focusing on passenger transport, promotion of public transport, which is great. Specifically bus transport, so not so much metro, but buses specifically, as well as the use of alternative energy resources and electric mobility. So these are the top 3 types of transport measures that we're seeing in the region. Next slide, please. And so at SCAP, we have launched a regional cooperation for low carbon transport about 2 years ago. That is actually a very specific initiative included in our regional action program for sustainable transport development in Asia Pacific, which is a 5-year program adopted by our member states. And over the past 2 years, we have consulted with more than 30 SCAP member states, and to really understand their needs, priorities, challenges, and preferences in terms of moving forward to transition to low carbon transport in the region. Next slide, please. And so this year, we've identified 3 specific topics that emerged from all those different consultations. And one of them was the development of low carbon transport targets and timelines in NDCs and beyond. And this was a very specific topic that was identified by our member states to be a topic that they would require additional assistance, not just in terms of finance, which we have heard earlier today, but also in terms of capacity building, institutional capacity, and a lot of the technical and knowledge transfer. I think this is an area that they will really need a lot of support on. And also, a lot of our member states already have very ambitious low carbon transport measures or master plans, but they do need a lot more support to implement those plans. So this was actually the rationale behind this focus area, and we were very happy to actually co-organize this event with the UK and also with the support of SLOCAT in July this year, to really better understand what are some of the priorities that SCAP member states would actually need moving forward. Next slide, please. And so in this regional meeting that we had in June, we've actually had a lot of different types of discussions with our member states, and we've actually found that by reviewing a lot of their existing roadmaps and strategies, we found that they do have sectoral and economy-wide low carbon national plans and strategies. But again, the critical point is that they need support in implementing these plans and strategies. So a lot more support on implementation action, how to align this implementation action with their national policies. Financing is an issue. It has always been an issue. The access to finance, to climate finance for low carbon transport is something of a priority for many of our member states, and we hope to continue to support them on. And this transition, this energy transition has also been part of our discussion in terms of laying out the roadmap to better align transport and energy. There are a lot of discussions on how to create or identify low carbon options for all modes. So not just on road transport, but perhaps also looking at maritime and aviation. And this has been very critical for Asia and the Pacific. And last but not least, there is a topic that kept coming up, even though we've been discussing with our member states on low carbon transport. The conversation always goes back to air pollution and congestion. Because I think for many cities and countries in Asia Pacific, these are still the two most critical issues for the transport sector. And perhaps we do need to do a better job in aligning some of these air pollution and congestion goals with our climate goals in order to create more attractive policies and strategies that countries can actually implement. So once again, these are just some of the key highlights. We had a specific discussion session, really looking at the alignment of some of the national low carbon transport roadmaps that countries have already developed, and some of the NDCs and some of the long-term leads as well, to see how to better align some of these initiatives and strategies. I'm not going to present all the different details, but basically the countries, they themselves are aware that they need to better enhance the transport content in the NDCs. And so I'm actually very happy to announce that this year, working very closely with the COP presidency, we've managed to mobilize almost 15 transport ministers and deputy ministers to Azerbaijan. And despite our effort to do this at every COP, it's not always very successful. But this year, we've actually managed to mobilize a significant number of transport ministers to be here this week. And I do hope that you will have a chance to meet with them or to participate in events that they will be speaking in, and to really help them understand that they need to be part of this conversation. And I do believe that in Asia Pacific, this message is very, very strong and clear. And through our discussions with countries as well, they know that the transport sector has to be more engaged moving forward. We've also discussed a lot of the tools and materials that can actually help improve their transport actions, including the establishment of baselines and targets, so that it's very clear to different countries how they can achieve the transport roadmaps or master plans that they have already developed, and when do they need to start reducing the targets and start seeing real results. And once again, the topic of collaboration and coordination has also been discussed. How can we better align what we're doing within our sector with what other sectors are currently developing, and how do we create platforms and opportunities, not just within countries, perhaps between sectors, to align some of our common goals. And so, as I've mentioned, we were also very happy to collaborate with many of our partners who are present here today to publish a policy brief on this very specific topic, to look at how we can better develop targets, more ambitious transport targets in NDCs and beyond. So there are 10 recommendations that we have concluded for this policy brief. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to describe all the different recommendations, but I do hope that the slides will be made available to all the participants, or you can also just download the report. So as you can see here, I have listed five of the 10 recommendations. The other 5 on the next slide. But basically, this first 5 recommendations are really focusing on, once again, aligning some of the common goals across different sectors, how to make sure that the national transport goals are aligned with the national climate targets, and also identifying more ambitious yet achievable. So we need to have realistic targets for countries, and also focusing on the expansion and improvement of public transport systems, which is aligned with existing NDCs in Asia Pacific. There has also been some discussions and, of course, recommendation on the phasing out of internal combustion engines and improve and increase the uptake of electric rail and vehicles, specifically for public transport. Next slide, please. And so these are the 5 other recommendations. So once again, implementing measures for cross-sectoral collaboration and having a focus on the just transition topic as well. How do we better develop the workforce in the sector and accelerating the finance needs and approaches for low carbon transport and the access to finance. Next slide, please. And so this is my last slide, and I also just want to show that, going back to the first report, the first policy brief that I've mentioned at the beginning of my intervention. So last week, UNESCAP has actually launched our 2024 review of the NDC, so review of climate ambition in Asia Pacific. This is actually an annual publication that UNESCAP actually releases, and we don't actually feature transport every year, but this year there is a transport chapter. And so I've been working very closely with our colleagues in other divisions and to really better understand how to strengthen the connection between transport and climate change. So here are some of the recommendations. Again, they are very similar to what we have developed with our partners, but one point that I would just want to highlight is that we do need to support technical innovations beyond electrification. Electrification is just one of the many solutions, and I do believe that there could be other advancements that we will need to synergize and capture moving forward. And also there's a very specific point which is very aligned with our session today, which is that we do need to set targets for transport with clear data collection processes. So it's not good enough to just set a realistic target, but do we have the right data? Do we know how to collect data, where to collect the data to really support the implementation of such targets and relevant action plan? So that is my last slide. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our further discussions.
Thanks very much, Wei Shiuen. In the spirit of a traffic warden and not a moderator, because otherwise I can see Holger getting more and more nervous, and it's only natural. I wouldn't like to be in his shoes. We're just going to take one of the aspects that you mentioned here. You put air pollution and congestion, isn't it, at the very center? I think as examples of how do we widen the conversations from climate to the wider sustainability goals that you also brought to mind. And that is very much what Nicolas is going to be touching upon. Nicolas is here. I'll introduce him as World Bank, but he's here today on behalf of the Sustainable Mobility for All, which is a big coalition, a big partnership. And Sustainable Mobility for All has precisely embarked now in the tracking of transport in the wider SDGs, isn't it? And this is a bit what you're going to be bringing to us here today, Nicolas. Please. You got a mic already? Let's check that it's working.
Yeah,
it's
working.
It works. No funny noises. Great.
All right. Thank you, Maruxa, and very good to be here. I don't have any slides, and I'll be very short. So hopefully, Holger will be happy.
It's more about the public. The public coffee break.
So, I'm from the World Bank, but as you said, I'm here with for that session with a bit of a different hat, since I represent Sustainable Mobility for All. The World Bank is one of the partners of this coalition, and what I'm going to do is to give you a little bit of an update on where we are and how Sustainable Mobility for All can contribute to the transport data agenda and to the global tracking towards sustainable transport. So for All is a partnership that was created in 2017 from the start, the objective was to promote sustainable mobility, and it has 4 dimensions. I mean, the definition of sustainable means clean, means safe, means inclusive, and it means efficient. The one specificity of this partnership is that we bring together stakeholders from very different horizons. So there are representatives from civil society, there are members from the private sector, and then there are some institutional partners, multilateral development banks, other international organizations, bilateral partners as well. So it's a quite broad multi-stakeholder type of partnership. And over the past years, we've been reflecting on how we can. There are many partners, in the many stakeholders in the global transport community, and so we had we met as a collective to think about what could be the specific value of a partnership like Swim for All, and where we could complement what others are doing, and data was one of the topics that was identified. And so as that collective decision, we created a data tracking initiative working group to operationalize this idea. And in parallel to this work on the data tracking, we started also a strategic discussion on how best to advocate for sustainable transport, because the transport sector is a little bit under the radar sometimes in some of the international discussions. I mean, there's a lot of attention to the energy sector, and there are some good reasons for that, and to other infrastructure sectors. Transport is perhaps a little bit less visible, and so we wanted, in parallel to that work on data, to think about the strategic advocacy. Now, there are many other transport initiatives that are ongoing. There are a lot of transport indicators. Transport is a very complex sector. Sometimes I envy my energy colleagues because they manage to frame their narrative along 2 dimensions, the energy transition and energy access. And they've kept hammering these messages over and over. It's more complicated to do for transport because we have all these transport modes, all these various dimensions. And there are a lot of ongoing transport data initiatives already. The Transport Data Commons Initiative, the excellent work that our Asian Development Bank colleagues are doing with the annual publication of the Asian Transport Outlook. There is the Tunis Data Hub. I'm going to miss many others, so I won't give the full list, but there's a lot of excellent work ongoing, and so what we felt within Sustainable Mobility for All is that what was perhaps missing is the prioritization of just a few indicators, a few higher level impact indicators that could capture the world's progress towards sustainable transport and the financing flows that are associated, but that could also help us to build a strong narrative to position the sector in those discussions, including on climate. No? And so one example of these indicators that come naturally to mind is to have something that can talk about access, the access dimension, like the other sectors are doing, energy, water, digital. They are all talking about the number of millions of people in the world who are lacking access. And so we need one for transport. Transport is doesn't have a standalone SDG, but it's embedded in many others. I think you mentioned that, no? That transport is essential for access to health, education, to eliminate hunger because of food security, to eliminate extreme poverty, and because it's so essential to these other indicators, sometimes it's a little bit hidden in the broader SDG agenda. So we felt that it is time to start thinking about an access indicator for transport, and we tried to build one at the World Bank. We recently updated our corporate scorecard indicators, and our scorecards used to have 150 indicators, and that was way too many to tell a proper development story. So our new president decided that we would focus on just 22 indicators, and these are people's related indicators, and one of them is transport. So we were very happy to achieve that results, because that will be one first step to start talking about access to sustainable transport. So the way it is defined, I won't get into too much detail, but basically it builds on the rural accessibility indicators, the million of people who are lacking access, who are to a very simple climate resilient road. And in urban area, we build on the work that our UITP and the UN Habitat colleagues have done on access to public transportation. So what is interesting is when you combine those two indicators, you have about 1.1 billion people in the world who lack access to just a small, simple climate resilient road, and 2.2 billion people who lack access to public transportation. So that's about half of the world's population lacking access to some basic notion of sustainable transport. Just to give an idea of the magnitude of the problem that we are facing in terms of access. So that's a little bit where we are. Obviously, there are other high-level indicators, and since we are at the COP, the measurement, the tracking of how transport is contributing to global GHG emissions is essential. We need to measure that in a consistent manner. It's about 20 to 25% of energy-related GHG emissions. I mean, one specificity is that transport is one of the sectors that keep increasing and accelerating. So not only it's a significant part of the problem, but it's a growing, the problem is growing, and since it's a significant part of the problem, it should also be a significant part of the solution. So I'll stop there. That's where we are. We meet every month as a collective as a steering committee, and then every 6 months as a consortium, and we hope to be reporting back on progress very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and thanks for helping with the time. Just a few final thoughts, if you allow me to, very, very quickly. They're not really thoughts, I'm just trying to connect a bit this session with the session that comes next. But the idea here is about trying to create a virtuous circle, isn't it? In which we no longer have data gaps, we no longer use proxies, we no longer use models that are not relatable to the context of low and middle income countries, as Malindi was pointing at, but we actually have the opposite. The idea is also to get to a place in which we would have tools that could be helping countries diagnose exactly where they are and what is the pathway they would need to achieve and how they can do so. And that, hopefully, if we get that basis right, the idea is a virtuous circle by which policy is based on knowledge, in which policy is aligned, whether it is the NDCs aligned with national policies on transport, whether it is the broader alignment of transport policies with the broader development and sustainability goals. So this is very much what this session was trying to illustrate. How, if we get the data and the modeling right, and then we got the process, the governance process for getting all the way there that Mark showed us, we can actually be changing things rather dramatically. From here, all I have to say is that thanks very much to all of you, and of course to our audience online, hoping that our audience online is going to still, stick around with us for a bit more, because we have 2 other sessions coming up on research tools and also on the climate finance question, which is critical this year at COP. From here, I believe we go to a short coffee break. Holger, a 10-minute coffee break. That was a clear message. It's 10 minutes, not more, coffee break, and then we continue the conversation. So thanks very much, and sorry that I had to rush you and that I just became a traffic warden, but I think we managed to get going. Thanks a lot.